Okay, today we're going to be looking at the Articles of Confederation versus the United States Constitution. To start off, we discussed this question. In order to succeed, you must, or this quote I should say, in order to succeed, you must fail so that you know what not to do the next time. Now, do you agree or disagree with that? The thought behind this is that when you fail, that teaches you something about, what you did wrong and how you need to fix it for the future. So sometimes it's good to have that happen so that you can see the mistakes, fix them, and then move on because you tend to be better with a little bit more experience, especially when that experience is filled with some things that didn't work as well as you like them to originally. The connection for this really is the fact that with the Articles of Confederation, the original United States government, it did fail, but maybe that was a good thing for us going forward because we live with that for less than 10 years, and then you go forward and you have the United States Constitution, which has been in effect for around 225 years. So obviously there was something positive to come out of that. As I said, though, we're going to be looking at the Constitution today, especially in comparison with the Articles of Confederation. It is the test of strength. Our quick recap: the Articles were too weak. They were replaced with a new government, which was known as the United States Constitution. And the big change is the fact that there now is a stronger federal government, because remember from the Articles of Confederation, all of the power was in the states. It is a big risk with this new government, though. So is it going to pay off? Well, that's something that we need to see. Our target for today: I can explain why the United States was both more secure and powerful under the new United States Constitution. And we have our target here. We've got our pit fan. And throwing a paper airplane. That's a little bit too weak. Some dictatorships, however, they come in and, well, they do this, and maybe that's a little bit, too strong, potentially. So that's that angle. Then we have our new Constitution, and it's just right. So there we go. There's our target for today. Now we're going to be looking at the Articles of Confederation with similar events and circumstances as they compared to the United States Constitution. And I like this quote because I think it fits in well, which is one of the oaths, and it says, "I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign or domestic." Now we're going to be looking at foreign and domestic situations here, and being domestic being internal things that occur within our country. It is interesting that it's all about defending the Constitution of the United States because that's what the ultimate authority is. It's not the president, because if the president violates it, then we're going to protect the Constitution over the president. First, let's start with some domestic issues. The Articles of Confederation had one real big rebellion that we discussed, which was Shays' Rebellion. In this rebellion, farmers were angry because they were poor and in debt. And a rebellion starts, they start burning down buildings, and the government can't step in. The federal government was too weak. There was no federal army. They had to actually go and ask the states to resolve it, which isn't a good situation when it starts getting too large. And, that really did prove that the federal government was a little bit too weak. The Constitution, in the United States Constitution, had an internal issue they had to deal with, which was known as the Whiskey Rebellion. This is early on in the history of the United States with the Constitution. Farmers were angry, though, and they were angry because there was a new tax on whiskey. The connection is, and I'll show it to you in a couple slides here with pictures, it's the idea that farmers who were selling their whiskey would have to pay a price to actually sell it, and they didn't like that idea because they said, why should we have to do this? That's unfair, it's hurting us, whatever else. Regardless, the federal government said, you have to pay the tax. So some of the farmers started rebelling, and George Washington himself marches the army out, meets these people, these rebels, and squelches the rebellion. The rebellion's over so quickly, and the tax, it goes through, it takes effect, and people recognize, you can't mess with the federal government like you used to be able to because it is stronger now. Now, just to talk about a couple quick points here. What is it about whiskey that farmers like? Well, if you look at the ingredients here, and I tried to get one that had the ingredients very clear, it says corn, rye, wheat, and barley. These are, and corn a little bit different, but rye, wheat, and barley are grains. So you're saying, why would a farmer care so much about whiskey? That doesn't really make sense. We have to put into a lot of context here. First off, consider this. What is a farmer to do when they have excess grain from their season? Well, what they're going to do is they're going to want to go and then sell it. Now, let's say that we're talking about people who are living in, let's say, the Pittsburgh area, because that's where this takes place, and I'll show you exactly where here in a few minutes. Pittsburgh at this point in time is a wilderness. There is no major city of Pittsburgh in the late 1700s. So for these people to be able to trade their grain potentially and make money, they're going to have to haul it all the way out east to Philadelphia, New York, one of the major markets over there. Here's the problem. They don't have any good access to get through the mountains, which are the Appalachians that are in the way. So you're going to have to, if you bring over grain, you're going to have to bring an absolute ton of wagons, and it'll be so inefficient, and it's not going to be really worth it for you to go do it. So these farmers are like, man, this stinks. We've got this nice land over here out west, but we can't really use it to make any money. Well, what they want to do is they want to distill their rye, wheat, and barley or other grains into types of alcohol like whiskey, because they can do that. It condenses it and makes it much easier to travel with, and you can make more money off of a finalized product than you can off of a raw material. So for them, they don't like this at all because it's really costing them money. Well, as I mentioned, they did try to get a little bit violent, but Washington brings out the troops, and he takes them all the way into these little areas that are, I don't know, like modern-day Upper St. Clair and Scott Township. It's really crazy to actually know this, but Couch's Fort was one of the forts of the rebels here with regards to the Whiskey Rebellion. If you go over by Chartiers Valley High School, there's a Neville House over there, and Neville is also involved in this. It's really in the same location. Couch's Fort itself is located right by where McDonald's is on Fort Couch Road now, though. So we're actually talking about George Washington brings the army, and really the only case in history where a president leads their army, brings it into the area where we are right now. So Couch's Fort, I'm being 100% serious. Fort Couch really is named after this potentially. Now, when we look at it, who is the best equipped to deal with domestic issues? I'd say that it's very clear that the United States Constitution fared far better than the Articles of Confederation did. On to the foreign issues. With the Articles of Confederation, at the end of the Revolutionary War, Britain refused to leave. They didn't want to take their troops out, and they said, what are you going to do about it? Essentially, we being the United States couldn't really do much because, well, what are you going to do? So what ended up happening here is it becomes a little bit of an issue because the government can't do anything, and Britain is kind of like a pain to us. With the Constitution, we had a far greater conflict that existed with the War of 1812. The War of 1812 started over some issues on the Atlantic Ocean dealing with what are two things, impressment and also the sinking of trade ships. And it becomes a pretty big issue to the point where the United States government feels, we need to declare war on Britain. That's the one who's involved in this. War starts. There's an unclear victor. However, we hold our ground. We don't lose the war, let's say, but maybe we don't decisively win it. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter because it shows the fact that, we can stand up to these foreign powers. I mean, think about this. There's a difference here with Britain wouldn't leave our country, and we couldn't make them leave. And it wasn't even a large group of soldiers. Then we're in a full-blown war with them, and we can handle it. Very, very significant difference. So, as we'll see, that definitely is going to favor the Constitution again. So the sinking of trade ships was one important aspect of this. The other one that I talked about was impressment. Impressment is when a ship is captured and all of the crew of the ship that are captured are forced to then serve as sailors on the other ship. We're really talking about this being involved with the Navy, so people are forced to join the Navy of an opposing country. I mean, that's as bad as it gets. So in this situation, impressment is one of the big things that our government was unhappy with, and one of the reasons they really did want to go to war with Britain. In the War of 1812, the White House was actually burned down, the original White House, and that's one of the more famous things, and rebuilt since then. But what really helped to turn the war in our favor, and is going to be something very important in history very soon, we'll talk about this in a few weeks, is that at the Battle of New Orleans, it was a huge, huge victory for the Americans. The casualty numbers dramatically favored the Americans. I mean, it was a very, very decisive victory, and they were led by a general named Andrew Jackson. So we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson here, the same guy who's on the $20 bill, a little bit later on, and all the significant parts of him, because he's a very interesting, controversial, and important president, because a lot occurs that's really because of him. So when it comes to foreign issues, though, War of 1812 versus Britain leaving North America, it's very clear that this really does favor the Constitution. So yesterday's big question was about George Washington. Was he a normal man or was he a dumb man? Was he something really, really special? And it makes you wonder now that you see today that the War of 1812 was far after Washington had died and not a president any longer. So was it him or was it something else? So I mean, that's something I want you to rethink. Was George Washington an A man or dumb man? So if you want to take a minute to think about it, you can do that and then come back in. Now, the second big question that we have is, well, which was more important to America's success early on? Was it Washington or was it the Constitution? Because as we've seen today, the success was not only with Washington later on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, what would have happened if George Washington wasn't the first president? Will we still have been okay because this United States Constitution was written so well? Or would there have still been some problems because George Washington did so well? I mean, the counter to that, you could say either the Constitution was the real hero here because anybody could follow it because it was written so well, or you could look at it from the other perspective and say, you know what, George Washington's leadership, the way that he interpreted the Constitution first, that set the stage for future people to do well also, and without his positive example to start with, or the precedents that he set, we wouldn't have had the success later on. I mean, it begs the question then, is Barack Obama today, and President Obama, former President Bush, former President Clinton, going on and on and on, are they still acting with the example of George Washington in mind? Is his influence that great? So it's an interesting question to think about. I'm not saying that there's necessarily a right answer. I'd say that both of them are important for sure, but which one was more important? That's your opinion. Something to think about, though. Now, we've come to another issue. At the end of Washington's second term of office, we need a new president. In Washington, he was unanimously nominated for 2 presidential terms in office. But after him, it's so different because you have different candidates, different goals, and you have a little bit of a divide in America. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's just there's a divide. Some people want to favor one candidate over the other. And Washington refers to this as being an issue. He calls it, or he says, there is the danger of parties in the state. This was included in his farewell address. What he's really talking about here are political parties. And these parties, these groups, they begin to form for better or worse. I mean, there's not really anything we can do about it. But it makes you wonder, why do people want to be members of a political party? And we're going to talk about this a lot more tomorrow. And, well, what's going to happen? Is it going to be a positive thing or a negative thing for us going forward? Now, the purpose of these political parties is to gather support for their political beliefs and to get things passed, because the more support you have, the more people who are on your side, the better, or the more likely you're going to be to have success. But a lot of people don't like them. Some people look at them as being more for personal gain than for public good. Washington said that parties would lead to jealousies and false alarms. He thought that they'd be playing each other against each other. They might exaggerate some rumors about their opponent to try to make themselves look good. Thomas Jefferson actually said, if I could not go to heaven but with a party, I would not go at all. The implication is he'd rather go to the bad place than to heaven if he could only go to heaven being a part of a political party. I mean, it's crazy the feelings that these people have. The really interesting part about this, though, is the fact that Jefferson actually gets heavily involved in party politics. So, he kind of turns his back on what he originally says is terrible. But, nonetheless, this is what we're going to be looking at tomorrow, is this idea of political parties. So tonight, make sure you do your review quiz on blended schools, the one that relates to the constitutional successes. And then tomorrow, we're going to pick back up and talk more about political parties and the positives, negatives, whatever else to them.